The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, taped to the apartment door with the kind of institutional indifference that comes from delivering bad news professionally. Rachel Morgan stood in the hallway of the building she'd called home for 8 months, staring at the bold letters that announced she had 14 days to vacate or face forcible removal by the county sheriff. 14 days. 2 weeks between her and the street. Her daughter Sophie, 7 years old with dark curls that hadn't been properly trimmed in months, peered around her mother's legs at the paper that seemed to command so much attention. "What's that, Mom?" Rachel forced her voice to stay steady, the practiced calm of a mother who'd learned to hide fear behind false confidence. "Just a notice, sweetie. Nothing to worry about." But everything was there to worry about. The math was brutal in its simplicity. Rent, $1,450 per month. Her income from 2 part-time jobs, $1,890. Food, utilities, gas for the 12-year-old Honda with the check engine light that never turned off, Sophie's school supplies, the medical bills from last winter's emergency room visit when fever had spiked to 104 degrees. The numbers never aligned. Every month she fell further behind, borrowing from the future to pay for the present, until the future arrived with legal papers and ultimatums. Inside the apartment, cardboard boxes already lined one wall, half-packed with the efficiency of someone who'd moved too many times in too few years. The furniture was minimal, purchased from thrift stores or rescued from curbs on trash day. Nothing matched. Nothing suggested permanence. The kind of space that could be abandoned quickly because nothing in it was worth protecting except the 2 people who slept there. Sophie settled onto the worn couch with her coloring books, the cheap newsprint pages already showing through from repeated use. She'd learned not to ask for new ones, had developed the economizing instincts of children who grow up watching their parents count change. Rachel watched her daughter color inside careful lines and felt the familiar weight of failure pressing against her chest. She'd been a dental hygienist once, before the practice had closed and the owner had fled with everyone's final paychecks. She'd been married once, before James had decided fatherhood was optional and California was far enough away to pretend he'd never had a family at all. She'd been confident once, back when having a college degree and work experience had seemed like protection against catastrophe. The phone buzzed with a text from her sister Diane. Family group chat. Rachel's stomach tightened even before she read the message. "Mom wants to clean out Aunt Linda's house this weekend. You coming to help, or are you too busy with your situation?" The casual cruelty of "your situation" landed exactly as Diane had intended. Rachel's fingers hovered over the keyboard, composing and deleting responses that ranged from defensive to angry to resigned. Finally, she typed, "I'll be there." Within seconds, her brother Marcus chimed in, "Bring a truck. Lots of junk to haul to Goodwill." Her younger sister Ashley, "Finally, getting rid of all that old lady stuff. About time." Rachel set the phone down without responding further. Aunt Linda had died 3 months ago at 87, her mind clear until the end but her body finally surrendering to age and the cancer she'd refused to treat. She'd lived alone in the same house she'd bought in 1962, a small 2-bedroom bungalow in a neighborhood that had declined as she aged, becoming the kind of place where gentrification hadn't reached and probably never would. The funeral had been small. Linda had outlived most of her friends and never had children. Rachel's mother, Linda's younger sister by 12 years, had organized everything with the grim efficiency of someone checking an obligation off a list. The house had sat empty since then, utilities turned off, mail forwarding nowhere. Now it was time to clear it out, so it could be sold. The proceeds divided among Rachel's mother and her siblings, according to whatever arrangement had been made, that Rachel hadn't been consulted about. Saturday arrived with grey skies that threatened rain but never delivered. Rachel drove to the old house, with Sophie buckled in the back seat, practicing her reading with a library book about dogs. The neighborhood looked worse than Rachel remembered from childhood visits. Houses with peeling paint and yards gone to weeds, chain-link fences rusting around concrete slabs where kids played basketball with netless hoops. Linda's house stood out only because its decline was more graceful than its neighbors, the bones of its mid-century architecture still visible beneath the weathered siding. A maple tree dominated the front yard, its roots buckling the sidewalk in patterns that looked like frozen waves. Diane's SUV was already parked at the curb, along with Marcus's pickup truck and Ashley's Jeep. The family gathering felt less like reunion and more like vultures circling, everyone assessing what might be worth claiming before the estate sale liquidated everything else. Inside, the house smelled of closed spaces and old age, that particular combination of mothballs and dust, and time standing still. The furniture was exactly as Rachel remembered from childhood visits. Dark wood pieces from the 1960s and 70s, built solid but unfashionable, the kind of things that lasted forever but nobody wanted anymore. Her mother, Patricia, stood in the living room with a clipboard, already organizing the division of labor with the managerial precision she'd developed during 30 years as an office administrator. At 68, she was still sharp, still commanding, still utterly certain that her way was the only correct way to handle any situation. "Rachel, you're late." Patricia's greeting contained no warmth, just assessment. Her eyes took in Rachel's worn jeans and faded thrift store sweater, the visible signs of financial struggle that Patricia viewed as evidence of poor life choices rather than bad luck. Traffic was heavy. The lie was automatic, easier than explaining. She'd stopped twice because Sophie needed the bathroom, and once more because the Honda's check engine light had started flashing in a way that suggested the transmission was considering surrender. Marcus emerged from the kitchen carrying a box of ancient cookware. At 42, he'd inherited their father's build and Patricia's certainty. He worked in commercial real estate and never let anyone forget it. "We're sorting into 3 categories: keep, donate, trash. Most of this is trash." Ashley appeared from the hallway, phone in hand, photographing things for some purpose Rachel couldn't immediately determine. She was 34, worked in marketing, and had perfected the art of being present without actually helping. This stuff is so dated. Nobody wants mid-century anymore unless it's the expensive stuff, and this is all just mass-market junk. Diane supervised from the doorway, her natural position in family dynamics. At 37, she'd married a lawyer and lived in a house with granite countertops and a 3-car garage. She had strong opinions about other people's choices and the financial security to believe those opinions mattered. "Rachel, you take the bedroom. We've already gone through the good stuff. Just box up whatever's left for donation." The good stuff. Translation: anything worth actual money had already been claimed or set aside for the estate sale. Rachel would be left sorting the remnants, the items too worthless to argue over, but still requiring someone's time to dispose of properly. Sophie clung to Rachel's hand as they walked down the narrow hallway to the back bedroom. The child's eyes were wide, processing the unfamiliar space and the tension in adult voices that even 7-year-olds could detect. "Who lived here?" "Your great-aunt Linda. My dad's older sister. She was very kind." Rachel's throat tightened with the memory of childhood visits, of Linda listening to her talk about school and dreams and fears with a tension that felt rare in a household where Patricia's judgment colored every conversation. Linda had never married, never had children, spent her life working as a librarian and living in this small house with her books and her garden, and her contentment with a life that others might have called small. The bedroom was frozen in time, everything exactly as Linda must have left it. The bed was made with a handmade quilt, edges precisely aligned. Photographs lined the dresser in mismatched frames, black and white images of people Rachel vaguely recognized as distant relatives. And against the far wall, positioned to catch light from the window, stood the vanity. Rachel stopped in the doorway, breath catching with unexpected recognition. She'd forgotten about the vanity, had buried the memory somewhere deep, but seeing it now brought everything back with startling clarity. She'd sat at this vanity as a child during those rare overnight visits, when Linda had let her play with old jewelry and pretend to be grown up. The mirror had 3 panels, the center large and the sides smaller, angled so you could see yourself from different directions. The wood was dark, possibly mahogany, carved with decorative details that suggested craftsmanship from an era when furniture was built to last generations. Pretty! Sophie moved toward it immediately, drawn by the ornate mirror and the sense of something special. She climbed onto the padded stool, her reflection multiplying in the 3-way glass. Rachel approached slowly, running her fingers over the carved wood frame. The surface was dusty but intact, the mirror slightly clouded with age, but still functional. The vanity had drawers on both sides of the central mirror, small ones at the top and larger ones below, each with brass hardware that had tarnished to a dull green. Diane appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting to dismissal the moment she saw what Rachel was examining. Oh God, that old thing, we're donating it. Nobody wants massive bedroom furniture anymore. Takes up too much space, totally out of style, and it's probably particle board under that veneer. It's solid wood. Rachel heard herself defending it before she'd consciously decided to engage. Look at the craftsmanship, the inlay work around the mirror. Rachel. Diane's tone carried the exasperation of an older sibling who'd spent decades being right about everything. It's old lady furniture. Even antique dealers don't want this stuff anymore unless it's by a famous maker, which this clearly isn't. We've already got more furniture than we need for the estate sale. This is going straight to Goodwill. Something in Rachel resisted, a stubbornness born from being dismissed one too many times. What, if I want it? Diane laughed, the sound sharp enough to make Sophie flinch. Want it? Rachel, you're about to be evicted. Where exactly would you put a giant vanity? In your car, when you're living in it again? The cruelty of the comment hung in the air between them. Sophie's eyes went wide, looking from her aunt to her mother, with confusion that would later crystallize into questions. Rachel didn't want to answer. I have 14 days. Rachel's voice came out harder than she'd intended. And I'll figure something out. But if nobody else wants the vanity, I'm taking it. Marcus appeared behind Diane, having overheard the exchange. This is ridiculous. You don't have space, you don't have money to move it, and it's worthless. Just let us donate it so we can finish clearing this room. If it's worthless, then why do you care if I take it? Rachel's hands were shaking, but she kept them at her sides, refusing to show weakness. You said yourself, nobody wants it, so I'll take it. Put it in storage until I figure things out. Storage costs money you don't have. Ashley had materialized with the rest of them, the family pack gathering to observe Rachel's latest bad decision. This is why you're in the situation you're in. You make emotional choices instead of practical ones. Patricia's voice cut through from the hallway. What's all this noise about? Diane turned to appeal to higher authority. Rachel wants to keep Linda's old vanity, the huge, worthless one. We're trying to explain that it's impractical and nobody wants it, but she's being stubborn. Patricia entered the small bedroom, which suddenly felt crowded with adult tension. She looked at the vanity with the assessing eye of someone calculating disposal costs. That thing weighs a ton. The movers wanted $400 just to take it downstairs and load it. Donation pickup is free. I'll figure out how to move it myself. Rachel heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. She was fighting over furniture she didn't need and had nowhere to put, but something deeper than logic was driving her. This vanity represented the only physical connection to Linda, to the aunt who'd treated her with kindness when everyone else in the family had treated her with judgment. And more than that, it represented the principle that she still had the right to want something, even if everyone else thought it was foolish. "You're being absurd." Patricia's verdict was final in tone, if not in fact. The vanity goes to donation. "We have actual valuable items to sort through, and you're wasting everyone's time arguing about furniture that's worth less than the gas to transport it." Sophie's small voice broke through the adult argument. "I like the mirror. It's like a princess vanity." The statement shifted something in the room's atmosphere. Marcus sighed heavily. Diane checked her phone. Ashley looked uncomfortable in the way people do when children's honesty exposes adult cruelty. Patricia's expression softened microscopically. "Sophie? Honey, your mother doesn't have room for this. It's very big and old, and not the kind of thing anyone uses anymore. But Great-Aunt Linda used it." Sophie's logic was 7-year-old direct, and Mom said she was very kind. So, it must be special. Rachel felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of her siblings, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing how close to breaking she actually was. "I'm taking it. You can donate everything else. Divide whatever money the estate makes, however you want. I don't care about any of that. But the vanity was Linda's, and it's the only thing I'm asking for, and I'm not letting you throw it away like it's nothing." The silence that followed felt like a calculation running through multiple minds. Was fighting over this worth delaying the whole clearing process? Was Rachel's stubbornness going to turn into a drawn-out battle that would require lawyers and formal estate proceedings? Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who wanted this finished. "Fine, take the vanity, but you're responsible for moving it yourself, and I'm not helping. Deal with it, however you want." Diane looked like she wanted to argue, but caught Marcus's expression and reconsidered. "Whatever, just get it out of here, so we can finish this room." They dispersed with the collective relief of family members who'd avoided escalation into full conflict. Rachel stood alone with Sophie in the bedroom, looking at the vanity she'd just fought for, with no idea how she was going to move it or where she would put it. Sophie climbed back onto the stool, studying her reflection with the serious concentration of a child processing complex adult behavior. Why were they being mean about the mirror? Because adults sometimes don't understand why things matter. Rachel joined her daughter at the vanity, both of their faces reflected in the three-way glass. They think just because something is old or doesn't cost a lot of money, it's not important. But Aunt Linda loved this vanity. She sat here every day, and that matters more than whether it's fashionable. Are we really going to lose our apartment? The question hit harder than Diane's earlier cruelty. Rachel wrapped her arms around Sophie, pulling her close. "I'm going to figure something out. I always do. Remember, we've been through tough times before, and we always make it through. But Aunt Diane said we might live in the car again. That's not going to happen." Rachel made the promise with more certainty than she felt. "I won't let it happen. I won't." They spent the rest of the day sorting through the bedroom, boxing up clothes for donation and books for the library and random personal items that had accumulated over 8 decades of living. Rachel found a small wooden box in the nightstand containing Linda's jewelry. Nothing expensive, but all of it meaningful. A high school class ring, a charm bracelet with tiny silver charms representing places she'd traveled, A brooch in the shape of a dragonfly, the enamel slightly chipped, but still beautiful. She slipped the box into her purse, knowing that Marcus and Diane would say it should go to the estate sale, but unable to let these small pieces of Linda's life be sold to strangers who wouldn't know or care about their stories. By 6 o'clock, exhaustion had settled over everyone. The house was mostly cleared, rooms reduced to their essential furniture, and the items deemed worthy of professional sale. Patricia announced they'd hire an estate sale company to handle the rest, the proceeds to be divided equally among herself and her 3 surviving siblings, with nothing going to the next generation. Rachel hadn't expected anything different. She'd never been included in family financial decisions, had long ago accepted that her poverty disqualified her from being treated as an equal in matters of money and inheritance. As everyone prepared to leave, Marcus approached Rachel with visible reluctance. "How are you planning to move that thing?" "I'll figure it out." "You don't have a truck. You barely have a working car." He sighed, the sound heavy with the burden of being the responsible one. "I'll help you load it tomorrow. But I'm only doing this once, and then you're on your own. I'm not helping you move it again when you can't find storage you can afford." The offer surprised her. Marcus was judgmental and often harsh, but underneath the real estate agent persona was occasionally something that resembled brotherly concern. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I just want this finished." But his tone had softened slightly. "Be here at 9. Bring straps or rope or whatever. And you're going to need to figure out storage by tomorrow afternoon, because I'm not taking it to your apartment." The drive home was quiet. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by a day of adult tension and emotional confusion. Rachel's mind raced through logistics. Storage units cost at least $100 per month for anything large enough to hold a Vanity, money she didn't have. Her apartment couldn't accommodate it, even if she wanted to bring it there, which would violate the eviction notice anyway. She'd fought for this piece of furniture with no practical plan for what to do with it. Ashley was right about one thing. She'd made an emotional choice over a practical one. But something about that Vanity had called to her, had demanded she not let it be discarded like trash when it had been important to Linda, when it represented beauty and care, and the kind of life Rachel wanted to be able to give Sophie someday. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Rachel sat at the small kitchen table with her laptop open to Craigslist, searching for storage solutions she couldn't afford. Every option exceeded her budget. Every calculation ended with the same conclusion. This was impossible. She pulled out Linda's wooden box and opened it, examining each piece of jewelry in the harsh fluorescent kitchen light. The brooch caught her eye again, that dragonfly with its delicate enamel work. She'd never seen Linda wear it, but she remembered asking about it once as a child. "That was my mother's," Linda had said, "from the 1920 Isn't it beautiful?" Dragonflies meant transformation and change, the ability to rise above circumstances. Rachel held the brooch up to the light, studying the craftsmanship that had endured for nearly a century. Transformation and change, rising above circumstances. She set it down carefully and returned to her laptop, this time searching not for storage but for local estate sale companies who might offer free appraisals. Most charged fees. A few offered appraisals only if you consigned items with them. But one, a small operation run by someone named Margaret Chen, advertised free, honest evaluations, no obligation. Rachel copied the phone number and decided to call in the morning. Sunday arrived too early. Rachel woke to Sophie bouncing on the bed, excited about helping move the princess mirror. The child's enthusiasm felt like accusation, a reminder of the choice Rachel had made without thinking through consequences. They drove back to Linda's house to find Marcus already there. Truck backed up to the porch, with the tailgate down. He looked tired, probably hung over from Saturday night, socializing that Rachel could no longer afford to participate in. "Let's get this done." His greeting contained no pleasantries. The Vanity proved every bit as heavy as Patricia had warned. It took 40 minutes to disassemble the mirror sections from the base, another 30 to maneuver the main piece down the hallway and out the front door. Marcus did most of the heavy lifting, refusing Rachel's help with the larger components in a way that felt more like criticism of her capability than chivalry. Sophie supervised from the porch, offering encouragement and suggestions that neither adult followed. When they finally had everything loaded and secured in the truck bed, Rachel felt sweat cooling on her back, despite the morning chill. "Where to?" Marcus stood beside the driver's door, keys in hand, impatient to be done with this obligation. Rachel gave him the address of a self-storage facility 15 miles away, the cheapest she'd found online. She'd called that morning and been quoted $89 per month for a 10x10 unit. First month, due immediately with a $50 administrative fee and requirement for insurance that added another $15 monthly. They drove in convoy, Marcus's truck leading, Rachel's Honda following. Sophie chattered about how they'd rescued the princess mirror from the bad people who wanted to throw it away, turning yesterday's family conflict into a fairy tale that was easier for a 7-year-old to process. At the storage facility, reality crystallized into stark clarity. The office was a trailer with paneling from the 1970s, and a clerk who explained all the fees and requirements with the monotone of someone who'd given this speech 10,000 times. When she reached the part about the $154 due immediately, Rachel's hand was already on her wallet, but her mind was calculating catastrophe. She had $247 in her checking account. Rent was already past due. Sophie needed new shoes. The ones she had were separating at the sole. Gas would eat up another $40 before next week's paycheck. The eviction notice said 14 days, which meant she needed to be looking for a new apartment, which required first month's rent and security deposit that she didn't have and wouldn't have and couldn't imagine how to acquire. "Can I have a moment?" Rachel's voice came out strained. The clerk nodded, already losing interest. She'd clearly seen this before. People realizing, mid-transaction, they couldn't afford what they thought they could. Rachel stepped outside where Marcus was unstrapping the vanity pieces. "I can't do this." "What?" He straightened. Irritation, immediate. "I don't have the money for storage. I thought I did, but I don't." Saying it aloud hurt worse than keeping it internal. "I'm sorry you wasted your morning." Marcus's expression cycled through reactions, anger to disgust, to exhausted resignation. "So what was the plan?" "Rachel, you fought everyone yesterday, made a huge deal about taking this thing, and you didn't even check if you could afford to store it. I thought I could figure something out." Even to her own ears, it sounded pathetic. "You never figure things out. You just make impulsive decisions and then expect other people to bail you out when it doesn't work." He slammed the truck bed. "I should have known. I should have just refused to help in the first place." Sophie had climbed out of the Honda and was standing nearby, watching her uncle yell at her mother with an expression that would haunt Rachel later. "I'm not asking you to bail me out." Rachel fought to keep her voice level. "I'll figure something else out. Can you just take the Vanity to Goodwill or wherever?" "You were right. This was stupid." "No." Marcus's voice went cold. "You wanted it. You dealt with it. I'm unloading it right here. What you do with it after that is your problem." He moved to the truck bed and began untying straps with aggressive efficiency. Rachel opened her mouth to argue, to beg, to offer some compromise, but no words came. She was out of options, and everyone knew it. Within 10 minutes, the Vanity sat on the asphalt parking lot of a storage facility, its pieces arranged in a rough assembly that exposed all its age and damage. In the harsh midday light, it looked exactly as her siblings had described it. Old, outdated, too large, the kind of thing nobody wanted for good reasons. Marcus climbed into his truck without another word and drove away. Rachel stood with Sophie in the parking lot, looking at the furniture she'd fought for and now had no way to protect or move or store. The clerk emerged from the trailer. "Ma'am, you can't leave that here. This is private property." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll move it." "To where?" She had no idea. Sophie tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Rachel knelt down to her daughter's level, forcing a smile that felt like wearing a mask. "We're going to be creative. That's what we do, right? We get creative when things are hard." She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she'd saved the night before. Margaret Chen answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the professional friendliness of someone who worked in customer service. "Hi, my name is Rachel Morgan. I saw your ad about free appraisals. I know this is short notice, but I have a piece of furniture that belonged to my aunt, and I'm trying to figure out if it has any value before I dispose of it." Margaret listened to the explanation, asked a few questions about the Vanity's condition and style, then surprised Rachel with her response. "I can come look at it today if you're near West Side. I'm actually heading that direction for another appointment." They arranged to meet at the storage facility in an hour. Rachel hung up, feeling a small spark of something that might have been hope, though experience had taught her to be suspicious of hope when circumstances looked bleak. She bought Sophie lunch from a drive-through with money they couldn't spare, and they sat in the Honda eating French fries while the Vanity sat 20 feet away on the asphalt, looking abandoned and ridiculous. Margaret Chen arrived in a white van with Chen Estate Services painted on the side. She was probably 60, with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of comfortable clothing that suggested someone who spent her days handling furniture and objects rather than sitting in offices. She approached the Vanity with the slow examination of someone who knew what they were looking at. Rachel stood back with Sophie, not wanting to interrupt whatever assessment was happening. Margaret ran her hands over the carved wood frame, examined the mirror glass, pulled out each drawer, and looked at the joinery. She produced a flashlight and studied the underside of the base, where dust had accumulated in thick layers. After 15 minutes that felt like hours, she straightened up and pulled out her phone, taking photographs from multiple angles. "Tell me what you know about its history." Rachel explained what little she knew. The Vanity had belonged to her great-aunt Linda, who'd owned it for as long as Rachel could remember. Linda had died recently at 87, and the family was clearing out her house. And nobody else wanted it. They said it was worthless, old lady furniture that nobody wants anymore. Rachel heard the bitterness in her own voice. Margaret's smile was knowing. "Your family isn't wrong about the market for mid-century bedroom furniture in general. Most of it has very little resale value right now. Heavy, dated, hard to place." The disappointment must have shown on Rachel's face because Margaret continued quickly. "However, this particular piece is interesting." She gestured to the carved details around the mirror frame. "This isn't machine work. This is hand-carved, probably early 1000, 920 seconds, based on the style and construction methods. See this inlay pattern along the top? That's Hollywood inset into what I believe is mahogany. Very time-consuming to do, which means this was a high-end piece when it was new." Hope flickered again, tentative. "So, it has value?" "Maybe. The market for antique vanities is tricky because they're so impractical for modern homes. But if this was made by a known craftsman, or if it has historical provenance, that changes things." She paused. Would you mind if I took more detailed photographs and did some research? I have reference books at my office that might identify the maker based on these construction details. That would be amazing. Thank you. Margaret looked at the vanity sitting on the asphalt, then at the storage facility office. Tell you what, I've got room in my van. Why don't I take this back to my office, where I can examine it properly? If it turns out to have significant value, I can help you sell it. If it doesn't, I'll bring it back or donate it for you. No fees either way. The offer felt too good to be true, which made Rachel's instinct was to be suspicious. Why would you do that for free? Because I love this work, and I love finding treasures that families almost threw away. And because I can tell you're in a tough spot, and maybe this could be the thing that helps. Margaret's expression was kind without being pitying. Also, honestly, I'm curious. This vanity has some features I've never seen before, and I want to know more about it. They loaded the vanity pieces into Margaret's van, with Sophie helping in ways that were more enthusiastic than useful. Rachel provided Margaret with her phone number and Linda's full name and the approximate address of the house where the vanity had spent decades. As Margaret drove away, Sophie waved goodbye to the princess mirror with the solemnness of someone saying farewell to a friend. Back in the Honda, Rachel felt the crash of adrenaline leaving her system. She'd fought her family, alienated Marcus, spent emotional energy she couldn't afford, all for a piece of furniture that was now in a stranger's van, heading to an unknown location. Do you think the mirror lady will find out it's special? Sophie's question was hopeful, in the way only children could be hopeful when adults had learned to expect disappointment. I don't know, baby, but at least now we'll know for sure, one way or another. They drove home through Sunday afternoon traffic, past houses with families barbecuing in backyards and washing cars in driveways. Normal domestic scenes that felt like they belonged to a different universe than the one Rachel inhabited. The apartment welcomed them with its familiar shabbiness. Rachel made mac and cheese from a box for dinner, while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table, both of them pretending the eviction notice wasn't still taped to the door, counting down days toward an uncertain future. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Rachel pulled up her bank account on her phone. The numbers glowed accusingly in the darkness. $247. The number that separated her from complete financial collapse. She'd bet everything on the possibility that a vanity might be worth something, had burned a bridge with Marcus, and probably reinforced her entire family's conviction that she made terrible decisions. She should regret it. She should recognize this as another impulsive choice that would end badly. But lying in the darkness of the apartment she was about to lose, Rachel felt something unexpected. A small, defiant satisfaction that she'd refused to let them throw away something that had mattered to Linda just because it was old and inconvenient. Sometimes, standing up for what mattered was worth the cost, even when you couldn't afford the cost. Her phone buzzed with a text, unknown number. She opened it to find a message from Margaret Chen. Got the vanity safely to my office. We'll start research tomorrow. Initial inspection shows some very unusual construction details. Stay hopeful. Rachel set the phone down and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it would mean if the vanity turned out to be valuable. Not millions. She wasn't delusional enough to believe in fairy tales. But maybe enough to cover first month's rent somewhere new. Maybe enough to buy Sophie shoes and fix the Honda, and have a small cushion against the constant terror of one emergency away from homelessness. Maybe enough to prove that fighting for something, even when everyone said it was worthless, was sometimes the right choice after all. She fell asleep with that small maybe protecting her from complete despair, not knowing that the vanity sitting in Margaret Chen's office was about to reveal secrets that would change everything. Monday morning arrived with the harsh reality of bills that couldn't be paid and a job that barely covered survival. Rachel dropped Sophie at school and drove to her first shift at the grocery store, stocking shelves with products she couldn't afford to buy. The work was mindless, the kind that left too much room for anxiety to circle through her thoughts like a predator looking for weakness. Her phone stayed silent all morning. No call from Margaret. No miraculous text announcing the Vanity was worth thousands. Just the steady accumulation of minutes toward an uncertain future. During her lunch break, Rachel sat in the Honda with a peanut butter sandwich and checked her bank account again, as if the numbers might have changed through sheer force of desperation. $247. She'd been staring at that number for 2 days, like it was a countdown timer on a bomb. The grocery store manager, Tom, knocked on her window as she was finishing the sandwich. He was 50, balding, wore the forced enthusiasm of someone who'd spent 30 years in retail and could recite company policies in his sleep. "Rachel, can we talk?" Her stomach dropped. Conversations that started with, "Can we talk?" never ended well. In his cramped office that smelled of industrial cleaning products and desperation, Tom delivered news with the apologetic tone of someone following orders they didn't entirely agree with. "Corporate is cutting hours across all locations. I've got to reduce your schedule from 20 hours a week to 12. Rachel felt the math recalculate automatically in her head. 12 hours at $15.50 per hour. $186 per week before taxes. Combined with her evening job at the call center, that brought her monthly income down to roughly $1,600. And rent was $1,450, which she couldn't pay anyway because she was being evicted. But any new apartment would require that much or more. Plus, deposits she didn't have. "When does this start?" "Next week." Tom looked genuinely sorry. "I'm sorry, Rachel. If it were up to me, I'd give you more hours. You're a good worker. But the directive came from regional. My hands are tied." She thanked him for letting her know, maintained composure until she reached the Honda, then sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make her knuckles white. The anger came first, hot and righteous and useless, then despair, cold and certain and paralyzing. Finally, a strange calm settled over her, the acceptance that comes when circumstances have degraded past the point where additional bad news changes anything. Her phone buzzed. "Margaret, Chen. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I've found something interesting. Very interesting." Rachel's pulse accelerated. What kind of interesting? The kind we should discuss in person. "Are you available around 3? She should be at her second job by 3, answering calls from angry customers about credit card charges and cable bills. But something in Margaret's voice suggested this couldn't wait. "I'll be there." She called the call center and claimed a family emergency, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her supervisor was unsympathetic, but agreed to find coverage, adding that Rachel was approaching her limit for emergency absences and future incidents would require documentation. Sophie's school let out at 2:45. Rachel picked her up and explained they were going to see the mirror lady, that maybe she'd learned something about the Vanity. Sophie bounced in the back seat with the unreserved excitement of a 7-year-old who hadn't yet learned that hope was dangerous. Margaret's office occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial section of town, sharing the block with an auto body shop and a wholesale plumbing supply company. The building's exterior gave no indication of what might be inside, just weathered brick and small windows too high to see through. Inside, the space opened into organized chaos. Furniture from every era crowded the floor in arrangements that suggested sorting in progress. A Victorian dresser stood next to mid-century modern chairs. Depression-era kitchen tables lined one wall. Boxes of estate sale items filled the gaps between larger pieces. Margaret emerged from a back room wiping her hands on a cloth. her expression combining excitement with something that looked like cautious disbelief. "Rachel, Sophie, thank you for coming." She led them through the maze of furniture to a workroom at the back, where the Vanity sat on a large work table under bright task lighting. But it didn't look the same as it had in Linda's bedroom or on the storage facility asphalt. Margaret had cleaned it, removing decades of dust and grime to reveal the wood's true color and the carving's full detail. The transformation was remarkable. The mahogany glowed with a deep red-brown richness that spoke of quality materials and careful maintenance. The inlay work Margaret had mentioned before was now clearly visible, intricate patterns of lighter wood, creating designs along the frame's edges and corners. "It's beautiful." Rachel moved closer, seeing the Vanity truly for the first time. "I didn't realize how beautiful it was under all that dirt." "Neither did I." Initially, Margaret pulled out a rolling stool and sat, gesturing for Rachel to do the same. Sophie stood at the Vanity, running small fingers over the carved details with reverent care. "I spent yesterday and this morning researching the construction techniques, the style of carving, the type of inlay work. They all pointed to a specific period and region. Early 1922, probably northeastern United States, definitely custom-made rather than factory-produced." Margaret pulled out a large reference book, its pages marked with sticky notes. "I compared the carving style to known examples from master craftsmen of that era." She opened to a marked page showing a photograph of an ornate table. The carved details matched the Vanity's style almost exactly. "This is the work of Samuel Harrison, a furniture maker who operated in Philadelphia from 1918 to 1931. He was known for extremely high-end custom pieces commissioned by wealthy families. His work is rare because he didn't produce much, maybe 40 pieces total that we know of. Most are in museums or private collections." Rachel's heart was beating faster. "So the Vanity was made by this Harrison?" "I believe so. The craftsmanship matches his known work. The materials, the techniques, the attention to detail. This isn't just old furniture, Rachel. This is a museum-quality piece by a significant craftsman. How much would something like that be worth?" The question came out smaller than Rachel intended, afraid of the answer in either direction. Margaret's expression shifted to something more complicated. "If I'm right about the maker, and if we can verify provenance, we're talking $15,000 to $25,000 at auction, maybe more, to the right collector." The number hit Rachel like a physical impact. $25,000. Enough to cover first and last month's rent and security deposit on a decent apartment. Enough to fix the Honda properly. Enough to buy Sophie a winter coat that wasn't borrowed, and shoes that fit, and books that weren't from the library. Enough to create a cushion against the constant terror of one emergency away from homelessness. That's incredible. That's life-changing." Her voice shook, despite efforts to control it. "Yes, it would be." Margaret's tone carried a weight that suggested there was more coming. "But that's not why I called you here." She stood and moved to the Vanity, running her hand along the top of the mirror frame. "When I was cleaning this yesterday, something felt wrong. The frame sections seemed heavier than they should be, even accounting for solid hardwood construction. And there were tiny imperfections in the carving on this upper section, like the wood had been worked twice, once for the original carving and again for something else." Sophie watched with wide eyes as Margaret produced a small flashlight and angled it along the top edge of the frame. "See this seam here? It's incredibly well hidden, disguised within the carved pattern. But it's there. The top section of the frame isn't solid. It's hollow." Rachel's mouth went dry. "What do you mean, hollow?" "I mean someone created a hidden compartment in the frame. Very sophisticated work, designed to be completely invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Margaret set down the flashlight and met Rachel's eyes. "I haven't opened it. This is your property, and whatever is inside belongs to you. But I think there's something in there, and I think it might be significant." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Sophie pressed against Rachel's side, sensing that something important was happening, even if she didn't fully understand what. "How do we open it?" Margaret pointed to a specific section of carved detail, a flower with petals that created a decorative pattern. "Based on the construction, I believe this section slides, but I wanted you to be here when we tried it. And I wanted to document everything properly, in case this turns out to be historically important." She produced a camera on a tripod and positioned it to capture the vanity from multiple angles. "For your protection and mine, I want video evidence of what we find and when we find it. If there's something valuable inside, you'll need documentation for insurance, for authentication, potentially for legal purposes." Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were shaking. Margaret positioned herself at the vanity's side, fingers carefully feeling the carved section she'd indicated. She pressed gently, testing. Nothing happened. She adjusted her angle, pressed again with slightly more force. Still, nothing. "It's been closed for a very long time. The wood may have swollen, or the mechanism might be stiff." She tried a twisting motion while pressing, and something clicked. A section of the carved frame, no more than 3 inches wide and 10 inches long, slid sideways with a sound like wood, whispering against wood. Behind it lay darkness, a void in the frame where solid wood should have been. Margaret reached for the flashlight, angled it into the opening, and her breath caught audibly. "Oh my God. What is it?" Rachel moved closer, trying to see into the compartment. "There's something wrapped in cloth. Multiple things, I think." Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Rachel, I need you to be the one to remove them. This is your property. You should be the one to discover what's inside." Rachel's hands were shaking so badly she had to try twice to reach into the compartment. Her fingers touched fabric, old and brittle. She grasped it carefully and pulled, withdrawing a bundle wrapped in what looked like silk that had darkened with age. She set it on the work table beside the vanity. The silk covering was tied with twine that crumbled when she touched it. Beneath the outer layer was waxed paper, yellowed and stiff. And beneath that, wrapped in tissue paper that tore at the slightest pressure, were papers. Not just papers, documents, old ones, with formal scripts and official seals. Margaret leaned close, not touching but examining with practiced eyes. "Those are bonds, government bonds. Look at the dates, 1,920 seconds. Rachel's vision blurred as she tried to focus on the ornate printing. United States Treasury bond, $1,000. Issued 1,923. The document was decorated with eagles and scrollwork and signatures that looked like they'd been written with quill pens. There were more beneath the first. She counted them carefully, hands steady now with the strange calm that comes when reality has departed so far from expectation that the mind stops trying to reconcile the disconnect. 10 bonds, each for $1,000, each dated between 1,923 and 1,927. These can't still be valid. Rachel heard herself say the words, as if from a distance. They're almost 100 years old. Margaret was already on her phone, typing rapidly. Government bonds, especially savings bonds from that era. If they were never cashed, they kept accruing interest. Some of them are still honoring bonds from World War I. Her fingers flew across the screen. "We need an expert. someone who specializes in historical financial instruments. But Rachel was reaching back into the compartment because her fingers had touched something else, something smaller and harder. She withdrew another bundle, this one wrapped in leather that had become brittle with age. The leather unwrapped to reveal a small cloth bag, and inside the bag, objects that caught the light with cold brilliance. Diamonds. Not jewelry. Loose stones, each carefully wrapped in paper, with handwriting noting what Rachel assumed were their specifications. The largest was perhaps 3 carats, the smallest barely a half carat. 10 stones total, ranging in size but all of them clear, their facets throwing tiny rainbows across the work table. Sophie gasped, a sound of pure wonder. Treasure. It's real treasure. Margaret had gone very still. The kind of stillness that comes from recognizing you're witnessing something extraordinary. She pulled out a jeweler's loupe from a drawer and examined the stones carefully, one by one, her expression growing more astonished with each inspection. These are high quality, very high quality, cut and clarity that suggest professional grading. She set down the loupe and looked at Rachel with something approaching awe. I'm not a gemologist, but I've handled enough estate jewelry to recognize exceptional stones. We're looking at $100,000 minimum here, probably significantly more. The number didn't compute. Rachel's brain rejected it as impossible, as a mistake, as a joke that wasn't funny. That can't be right. It is right. Margaret's voice was firm. These aren't costume jewelry rhinestones. These are genuine diamonds, likely purchased in the 1920 seconds when your great-aunt, or whoever hid these, was building this collection. Rachel reached into the compartment again, her hands moving with automatic precision now, shock giving way to the mechanical process of discovery. More bundles emerged, more documents. Stock certificates from companies she'd never heard of, dated from the 1920 seconds and 1930 seconds. Some of the company names she vaguely recognized: General Electric, Ford, Standard Oil. Others meant nothing to her. And beneath the stock certificates, more jewelry. Gold pieces, some with precious stones, some without. Brooches and rings and necklaces, each carefully wrapped and documented with small tags noting their description and date of acquisition. Margaret photographed everything as it emerged, her camera clicking steadily, creating a record of the discovery that was unfolding on her work table. The final item in the compartment was a letter, sealed in an envelope that had yellowed but remained intact. On the outside, written in careful script, were words that made Rachel's hands freeze. To whoever finds this, I trust you will understand why it was necessary. Linda Mitchell, 1962. Linda. Aunt Linda had hidden these things, had created this secret compartment and sealed it away, had lived for more than 50 years with this fortune hidden in her bedroom furniture, never using it, never mentioning it, never revealing its existence to anyone. Rachel's hands shook as she opened the envelope, trying to be careful with paper that might disintegrate under rough handling. The letter inside was written on good stationery, the kind that lasted, in the same careful script as the envelope. My dear finder, if you're reading this, then I have passed on, and someone has been curious enough to discover what I hid so carefully so long ago. I hope that person is someone who will understand and not judge too harshly. These items were given to me in 1928 by a man named Thomas Harrison. He was 26 years old. I was 19. We were in love, or what we thought was love, at that age. His father was Samuel Harrison, the furniture maker. The Vanity where you found this letter was one of his father's pieces, commissioned by Thomas's mother and given to me as a gift when Thomas and I became engaged. Thomas's family was wealthy. Mine was not. His parents did not approve of the engagement. They believed I was after their money, that I had seduced their son for financial gain. In truth, I loved Thomas and didn't care about his family's wealth, but his parents would not be convinced. In 1928, Thomas came to me with these items: the bonds, the diamonds, the stocks, the jewelry. He said they were his inheritance from his grandmother, that they belonged to him legally and that he wanted me to have them. He wanted to prove to me that we could build a life together regardless of his parents' approval, that he had means of his own. I refused them. I told him I would marry him with nothing or not at all, that I didn't need his wealth to love him. We argued. He insisted. Finally, I agreed to hold them temporarily, thinking we would use them after we married to start our life together. 2 weeks later, Thomas died in an automobile accident. He was driving too fast in rain, lost control, struck a tree. He died instantly. His family blamed me. They said I had distracted him, that his reckless driving was because of our relationship turmoil. They said terrible things at his funeral. They told me I was not welcome to grieve with them. After the funeral, I realized I still had Thomas's inheritance. The bonds, the diamonds, the stocks, everything he had given me. By law, they should have returned to his family. But his family had treated me with such cruelty, had blamed me for his death, had cast me out of their grief. I made a choice. I kept the items. I hid them in the vanity that Thomas's mother had given me before she turned against me, and I never told anyone, not his family, not my family, not anyone. I could have used them. During the Depression, these bonds alone would have been worth a small fortune. The diamonds could have bought a house. The stocks would have made me wealthy. But I couldn't bring myself to spend them. They weren't mine, not really. They were Thomas's, and he had died before we could use them together. So I kept them hidden, and I lived a simple life. I worked as a librarian. I never married. I never had children. I never needed wealth, because I never wanted wealth. I wanted Thomas, and he was gone. If you found this, then you needed it more than I did. Perhaps you're struggling financially. Perhaps you're facing hardship that makes these items seem like salvation. If that's the case, then use them without guilt. Thomas wanted them to help someone he loved. I couldn't use them, but maybe you can. Don't think of this as theft or deception. Think of it as a gift that waited 90 years to find the person who needed it. Thomas would have approved, I think. He was generous and kind, and he believed in helping people who were struggling. My only request is this: remember that wealth doesn't create happiness, and that love matters more than money. Thomas and I had love and lost everything. You have found money, and I hope you find love alongside it. With hope that you are worthy of this gift, Linda Mitchell, November 1962. Rachel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face unchecked. Sophie pressed against her side, sensing the emotional weight of what her mother was processing. Margaret stood silently, giving Rachel space to absorb what she'd learned. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle. Linda kept this secret her entire life. She lived with poverty all around her, could have solved her financial problems at any time, but she couldn't bring herself to use the money because it represented a love she'd lost. She could have been rich. Rachel's voice was thick with tears. She lived in that small house, worked her whole life, never had anything extra. And all this time, she had a fortune hidden in her bedroom. But she couldn't use it. The guilt would have destroyed her, so she hid it and waited for someone who would need it, without the burden of knowing where it came from. Margaret moved closer. Rachel, Linda chose to let this sit for 60 years. She chose to live simply, rather than benefit from what she felt was a betrayal of trust. That tells you something about her character. And now she's giving it to me. Rachel looked at the bonds and diamonds and jewelry spread across the work table. She's been dead for 3 months, and she's saving my life from the grave. They spent the next hour carefully documenting everything. Margaret photographed each item, created an inventory list, and began making calls to experts who could properly evaluate what they'd found. A financial historian she knew agreed to examine the bonds and stock certificates. A gemologist said he could assess the diamonds the next morning. An antiques dealer, who specialized in early 20th century jewelry, offered to provide authentication and appraisal services. While Margaret made arrangements, Rachel sat with Linda's letter, reading it again and again, trying to understand the woman who had been her great-aunt. The woman who had sat at this vanity every day for decades, knowing what was hidden inside, choosing not to use it. "Mom, does this mean we don't have to leave our apartment?" Sophie's question was small, hopeful, afraid to believe. Rachel pulled her daughter close. "It means we're going to be okay. More than okay. It means Great-Aunt Linda found a way to take care of us, even though she never got to meet you." By the time they left Margaret's office, arrangements had been made for expert evaluations to begin immediately. Margaret estimated that even conservative valuations would put the total value of the discovery well over $500,000, possibly as much as $800,000, once the bond's accumulated interest was calculated and the stock's historical value was assessed. The numbers were so large they felt abstract, fake, like play money in a game Rachel didn't know she was playing. But Margaret's serious expression made it clear this was real. Driving home, Rachel's mind raced through implications. She could pay off the eviction, could afford to stay in the apartment, or move to something better. She could fix the Honda or buy a different car entirely. She could quit one of her jobs, could actually be present for Sophie's childhood instead of constantly working and still falling behind. She could breathe. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with Linda's letter spread before her. The eviction notice was still taped to the door, but its power had evaporated. It was just paper now, just words that no longer had the weight to crush her. She thought about her family, about Marcus and Diane and Ashley, who had dismissed the vanity as worthless junk, about Patricia, who had seen it as an inconvenience to be disposed of as cheaply as possible. They had been so certain it was nothing, so dismissive of Rachel's emotional attachment to something they couldn't understand. Tomorrow, she would need to tell them. Tomorrow, the discovery would become official and public and impossible to hide. Tomorrow, her siblings would learn that the furniture they'd mocked was worth more than anything else in Linda's estate combined. The thought should have brought satisfaction, should have felt like vindication. But Rachel felt something more complicated. Sadness for Linda, who had lived with this secret alone. Gratitude for the gift that had come precisely when she'd needed it most. And a strange protectiveness toward the memory of a woman who had chosen love over wealth and simplicity over comfort. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Financial historian called back. Initial assessment of the bonds shows accumulated interest that could push their value to $75,000, $90,000. Stock certificates are harder to evaluate, but several companies are still operating under different names. More tomorrow. Get some sleep if you can. Rachel set down the phone and looked around the shabby apartment that would soon be a temporary stop rather than the end of her journey. She thought about Sophie sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware that their lives had just transformed. She thought about fighting her family for a piece of furniture everyone said was worthless. about the stubbornness that had made her refuse to let them throw it away, about the instinct that had told her the vanity mattered even when logic said it didn't. Sometimes fighting for what seemed worthless was how you discovered what was priceless. She fell asleep at the table, Linda's letter still clutched in her hand, dreaming of a woman she'd barely known who had loved someone deeply enough to protect his memory for 60 years, and who had found a way to transform that loss into a gift that would change everything. Tuesday morning arrived too early, but felt different. Rachel woke with the strange sensation that gravity had changed, that the constant weight she'd carried had lifted just enough to allow her to stand upright without effort. She got Sophie ready for school with an ease that came from not calculating whether they could afford breakfast. She drove to the grocery store for her morning shift without the usual anxiety about whether the Honda would make it. The eviction notice was still on the door, but it was no longer a death sentence. Tom caught her during her break, apologizing again about the hour reduction. Rachel listened with patience she hadn't possessed yesterday, understanding that this job was now optional rather than essential. She didn't quit. Not yet. But the knowledge that she could quit changed everything. Margaret called at 11. The gemologist examined the diamonds. Rachel, sit down, if you're not already sitting. I'm in the break room. What did he find? The stones are exceptional. The largest is 3.2 carats, D color, internally flawless. That one alone is worth $180,000 by itself. The others range from $15,000 to $90,000 each. Total value of the 10 stones is $647,000. Rachel gripped the phone hard enough to make her hand ache. $647,000. In diamonds that had sat in a hidden compartment for almost a century, wrapped in paper and forgotten. That's not including the bonds, or the stocks, or the jewelry, Margaret continued. The financial historian is still researching, but his preliminary assessment suggests the bonds are worth at least $85,000 with accumulated interest. The stocks are more complex, but several of the companies continued operating under different names. He thinks those could be worth another $150,000 to $200,000 if we can establish clear chain of ownership. Rachel did the math automatically. Minimum $882,000, possibly as much as $950,000, nearly $1 million. The jewelry is still being appraised, but based on the gold content alone, we're looking at another $30,000 to $50,000. And the Vanity itself, as a Samuel Harrison piece with this incredible historical provenance, could sell for $50,000 or more to a museum or serious collector. I don't understand. Rachel's voice came out weak. How did Linda have all this? Her family wasn't wealthy. She worked as a librarian her whole life. She didn't have it through her own wealth. She had it because someone loved her enough to give her his entire inheritance, and she loved him enough to protect it even after he died. Margaret's voice was gentle. Rachel, this is real. This is happening. You're about to become a very wealthy woman. The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze. Rachel finished her shift, moving through familiar motions while her mind tried to process a reality that didn't match any experience she had to compare it to. Wealthy. The word felt foreign, like a language she didn't speak being applied to describe her. She picked up Sophie from school and took her to Margaret's office, where experts were still examining the items from the hidden compartment. The gemologist, a man in his 60s named David Chen, showed Sophie the largest diamond through his loupe, explaining how clarity and cut affected value with the patience of someone who loved his work. The financial historian, a younger man named James Rodriguez, had spread the bonds and stock certificates across a table, comparing them to reference materials and making notes with meticulous care. He looked up when Rachel entered. his expression combining professional excitement with genuine happiness for her. "Miss Morgan, these bonds are extraordinary, not just because of their value, but because of their condition. They've been perfectly preserved. Some bonds from this era have deteriorated or been damaged by improper storage, but these are pristine. And the stocks, well, several of these companies became major corporations. You're holding pieces of American industrial history." Margaret pulled Rachel aside while Sophie watched the expert's work. "We need to talk about next steps. This kind of discovery requires careful handling, legal documentation to establish clear ownership, proper authentication to maximize value, decisions about whether to sell immediately or hold certain items for better market conditions. I just want enough to be stable, to have a safety net." Rachel heard the smallness in her own voice, the inability to think in terms of the numbers being discussed. "Rachel, you're going to have more than a safety net. You're going to have generational wealth, the kind of money that changes not just your life, but Sophie's life, her children's lives. This requires planning beyond immediate needs." The implications were overwhelming. Rachel had spent so many years thinking in terms of survival, of making it through one more week, one more month. Thinking in terms of decades and generations felt like trying to speak a language she'd never studied. Margaret must have read her expression because she continued more gently. "I have contacts, financial advisors who specialize in sudden wealth, who can help you make smart decisions. But first, we need to secure these items properly. I've arranged for a safety deposit box at a bank. Everything will be insured and protected while we complete the authentication process." They spent 2 hours transferring items to the bank, each piece documented and photographed and secured. The manager treated Rachel with deference she'd never experienced, calling her Miss Morgan instead of just Rachel, offering premium services and private banking options with interest rates that actually existed outside of promotional materials. On the drive home, Sophie was quiet, processing what she'd seen and heard with the seriousness of a child who understood something important had happened, but couldn't quite grasp its full scope. "Mom, does this mean we're rich now?" Rachel considered how to answer. "It means we don't have to worry anymore. We can afford a nice place to live, and you can have new clothes, and I can fix the car, and we can save money for your college. Can I get the dog I've been asking for?" The question was so perfectly 7-year-old that Rachel laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. "Yes, baby, you can get a dog." That evening, Rachel finally allowed herself to call Diane, the conversation she'd been dreading but could no longer avoid. Her sister answered on the third ring, voice carrying the impatience of someone interrupted during dinner. "Rachel, what do you want?" "I need to tell you something about Aunt Linda's Vanity, the one you wanted to donate to Goodwill." "Oh God, don't tell me you're still going on about that ugly furniture. Did it cost you money to move? Because I told you it was worthless." Rachel took a breath, steadying herself. It wasn't worthless. There was a hidden compartment in the mirror frame. Margaret Chen, the estate appraiser I hired, found it when she was examining the construction. "A hidden compartment?" Diane's tone shifted from impatient to interested. "What was in it? Old photos? Letters? Bonds? Government bonds from the 1922nd. And diamonds. 10 loose diamonds, high quality. And stock certificates. And jewelry." Rachel delivered the information in flat statements, not embellishing, just facts. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Rachel checked her phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, Diane's voice came back, tight and controlled. "How much are we talking about?" "The diamonds alone are worth about $650,000. The bonds are around $85,000. The stocks are still being evaluated, but probably $150,000 to $200,000. The jewelry is another $40,000. Total value is close to $1 million. The silence was absolute. Rachel could almost hear her sister's thoughts, recalculating, reassessing, replaying the moment when she dismissed the vanity as worthless junk. "That's impossible." Diane's voice had gone cold. "You're lying." "I'm not lying." Margaret documented everything. The diamonds were appraised by a certified gemologist. The bonds were authenticated by a financial historian. It's all real, Diane. Then, it belongs to the estate, to all of us. You can't just claim it because you took one piece of furniture. Rachel felt her grip on the phone tighten. The vanity belonged to Linda. She hid these items in it deliberately. They're not part of the general estate. They were hidden in furniture that no one wanted except me. We didn't know they were there. That changes everything. You have to split this with the family. It's only fair." "Fair?" Rachel's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You called me stupid for wanting the vanity. You said I was making emotional decisions instead of practical ones. You literally told me it was worthless junk. And now that it turns out to be valuable, suddenly it should be shared. This is different, and you know it. This is family money. Linda's estate should be divided equally among Mom and her siblings. You're stealing if you keep this." "I'm not stealing anything. I saved something from being thrown away that everyone else said had no value. I found what was hidden inside. It's mine." Diane's voice went sharp. "Dangerous. We'll see what a lawyer says about that. Don't think you're just going to keep $1 million because you were stubborn about one piece of furniture." "This isn't over, Rachel." The call ended abruptly. Rachel sat staring at her phone. The brief satisfaction of telling Diane about the discovery evaporating into anxiety about what was coming next. Margaret called within an hour, her voice tight with concern. "I just got a call from someone named Marcus Morgan, claiming to represent the family estate. He's demanding I turn over all items from the vanity immediately, saying they belong to the collective heirs." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that I'm representing you as your agent, that the items were discovered in your property, and that any disputes would need to be resolved through proper legal channels." Then I called my attorney. Margaret paused. "Rachel, this is going to get ugly. Your family isn't going to let this go without a fight." "Let them fight." They threw away something precious because they couldn't see past their own assumptions. They don't get to claim it now that it turns out they were wrong. That's the right attitude. But you need to prepare yourself. Family disputes over money can get vicious, especially when the amounts are this large. Margaret's voice softened. "I've already contacted several attorneys who specialize in estate disputes. I'm sending you their information. Call them tomorrow. Don't wait." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to Sophie breathe in the next room, and tried to imagine what was coming. Her family united against her, claiming she'd stolen from them, painting her as greedy and opportunistic and wrong. They'd say she'd manipulated Linda, that she'd known about the hidden compartment all along, that she'd deliberately fought for the vanity because she wanted to keep the treasure for herself. They'd rewrite history to make themselves the victims and her the villain. Her phone buzzed with texts throughout the night. Marcus demanding she return the items immediately. Ashley claiming Rachel was tearing the family apart. Even Patricia sent a message, cold and authoritative. "This behavior is unacceptable. You will share the proceeds from Linda's hidden assets or face legal consequences." Rachel didn't respond to any of them. She lay in the darkness of the apartment she was about to lose, thinking about Linda's letter, about a woman who had chosen to live simply, rather than benefit from wealth she felt didn't belong to her. But this was different. Rachel hadn't stolen anything. She'd saved something everyone else wanted to throw away. She'd cared enough to fight for it when no one else did. And Linda's letter had been clear. Whoever found the hidden treasure was meant to have it. Linda had waited 60 years for the right person to discover her secret. That person was Rachel, and she wasn't going to let her family take away the gift that Linda had left for someone who needed it. The morning would bring lawyers and arguments and family accusations. But tonight, Rachel allowed herself to feel the weight of Linda's choice, the burden and blessing of a fortune that came with history and heartbreak and hope. She would fight for it. For Linda, for Sophie, for the principle that sometimes the things everyone says are worthless turn out to be priceless. And she would win. Wednesday morning brought the first legal salvo. A courier delivered papers to Rachel's apartment at 7:15 a.m., just as she was getting Sophie ready for school. The envelope was thick, professional, intimidating in the way legal documents are designed to be. Inside was a petition filed by Patricia Morgan, on behalf of herself and her children, demanding immediate surrender of all items discovered in Linda Mitchell's Vanity, claiming they were part of the general estate and subject to equal distribution among all heirs. The language was aggressive, accusing Rachel of concealment of estate assets and breach of fiduciary duty to family members. At the bottom, in bold text, court hearing scheduled for Monday, 9 a.m. Your presence is mandatory. Sophie watched her mother read the papers with the worried expression of a child who'd learned to read adult stress through body language. Is it bad? A dot. Rachel forced a smile that felt like lying. It's just paperwork, baby. Grown-up stuff about Great-Aunt Linda's things. Nothing for you to worry about. But it was absolutely something to worry about. 5 days until a judge would decide whether Rachel's claim to the hidden treasure was legitimate or whether her family could force her to split what she'd found. 5 days to build a defense against people who shared her blood but had never shown her mercy. She called the first attorney on Margaret's list, a woman named Catherine Walsh, who specialized in estate disputes. Catherine's assistant said she could see Rachel that afternoon, a squeeze-in between other clients. But the urgency in Rachel's voice must have communicated itself, because the appointment was confirmed immediately. The morning shift at the grocery store felt surreal. Rachel stocked shelves with canned vegetables and pasta, smiling automatically at customers, going through motions that felt increasingly disconnected from her actual life. She was potentially a millionaire being sued by her own family, while earning $15.50 an hour putting soup on shelves. Catherine Walsh's office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated building downtown, the kind of professional space that suggested success without ostentation. The waiting room had leather chairs and current magazines and art that looked original rather than mass-produced prints. Catherine herself was 50-something, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Rachel's entire wardrobe, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and eyes that assessed everything. She gestured Rachel into her office and closed the door with the deliberate care of someone creating a confidential space. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. Rachel told the story from the eviction notice to the family gathering to fighting for the Vanity to Margaret's discovery to Linda's letter to her family's immediate legal response. Catherine listened without interrupting, taking notes with occasional questions that clarified timeline or specific details. When Rachel finished, Catherine sat back and considered what she'd heard with the measured deliberation of someone calculating odds. Your family's petition is aggressive, but not particularly strong. Let me explain why. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing as she talked. First, property law is clear. The Vanity was Linda's personal property, included in her estate. When your family divided the estate informally, no one contested your claim to the Vanity. They actively encouraged you to take it. even if their encouragement was dismissive. That establishes transfer of ownership. But they didn't know what was inside. Rachel voiced the argument she knew was coming. Doesn't matter. When you sell a house, you can't come back later and demand additional payment because you discover there was gold buried in the backyard. The sale transfers all rights, known and unknown. Same principle applies here. They transferred the vanity to you. What you discovered inside belongs to you. Catherine continued, ticking off points on her fingers. Second, Linda's letter is powerful evidence of intent. She explicitly states that whoever finds the hidden treasure is meant to have it. That's a clear testamentary expression of desire, even if it wasn't in her formal will. Courts give weight to documented wishes, especially when they're as unambiguous as Linda's letter. Third, and this is important, your family's behavior demonstrates they viewed the vanity as worthless and wanted nothing to do with it. You have witnesses. Margaret Chen can testify that Marcus helped you move it. Your siblings sent texts and made statements dismissing it as junk. That establishes that they knowingly and willingly gave you something they didn't want. Rachel felt hope rising cautiously. So, you think we can win? I think you have a very strong case. But I need to be honest with you about what's coming. Your family will paint you as manipulative, as someone who knew about the hidden compartment and deliberately deceived them. They'll claim undue influence, that Linda was elderly and confused when she wrote that letter, that you somehow manipulated her despite the fact that the letter was written when she was 62 and sharp as a tack. Catherine's expression was sympathetic but firm. Family disputes are ugly, Rachel. They'll say terrible things about you in court. They'll bring up your financial struggles, your eviction, your history. They'll try to make you look desperate and dishonest. You need to be prepared for that. I am prepared. Rachel's voice was steadier than she felt. They've been judging me for years. This is just the first time it matters what a judge thinks, instead of what they think. Good. That's the right attitude. Catherine smiled slightly. Now let's talk about strategy. We're going to document everything. I want statements from Margaret about the discovery process, about her conversations with your siblings. I want testimony from anyone who witnessed your family dismissing the vanity as worthless. I want financial records showing Linda's life of modest means, demonstrating she never used the hidden treasure. She pulled out a contract. My retainer is $5,000. Given the value of what you're protecting, my fee will be 15% of the total if we win. If we lose, you owe nothing beyond the retainer. But Rachel, we're not going to lose. Rachel signed the contract with hands that only shook slightly. $5,000 was money she didn't have 2 weeks ago, would have represented an insurmountable sum. Now it was an investment in protecting something worth far more. Over the next 4 days, Catherine built their case with the methodical precision of someone who'd fought these battles before. Margaret provided detailed documentation of the discovery process, photographs time-stamped and geotagged, proving when and where the hidden compartment was opened. She gave a deposition describing her conversations with Marcus and Diane, their dismissive comments about the vanity, their active encouragement for Rachel to take it away. David Chen, the gemologist, provided written authentication of the diamonds, their quality and value, their age consistent with 1,920 cutting styles. James Rodriguez, the financial historian, submitted reports on the bonds and stock certificates, their provenance and accumulated value, their historical significance. Catherine even tracked down Betty Torres, a neighbor who'd lived next to Linda for 30 years. Betty testified that Linda had lived simply, worked until retirement, never displayed wealth or made expensive purchases, was known in the neighborhood as someone who clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores. The testimony established that Linda had deliberately chosen not to use the hidden treasure, supporting the narrative in her letter. Meanwhile, Rachel's family mounted their own case. Patricia hired Richard Hendricks, an attorney whose reputation suggested he specialized in aggressive litigation and intimidation tactics. Marcus sent Rachel a text that read simply, "You're destroying this family over greed. I hope you can live with yourself." Ashley posted on social media vague references to family betrayal and people who show their true colors when money's involved. Diane sent a long email detailing all the times the family had helped Rachel, loans that had never been mentioned before, favors that Rachel didn't remember receiving, painting a picture of ingratitude and selfishness. Sophie started having nightmares. She woke up crying on Thursday night, confused about why Aunt Diane was mad at them, whether they'd done something wrong. Rachel held her daughter and tried to explain in 7-year-old terms that sometimes adults disagree about important things, that it didn't mean anyone was bad, that it would all be okay. But she wasn't sure it would be okay. The weight of her family's collective anger pressed down with suffocating force. She'd known they would fight, but experiencing the reality of their united hostility was different from anticipating it. Friday afternoon, Catherine called with news. "Richard Hendricks contacted me. He wants to settle." Rachel's pulse accelerated. Settle? How? "They're offering to drop the lawsuit in exchange for half. You keep $500,000. They split the other $500,000 among Patricia and your siblings. No admission of wrongdoing on either side. Clean break. Everyone moves on." The offer was substantial. Life-changing money even when cut in half. Rachel could afford a house, could set up Sophie's college fund, could have security she'd never imagined. And she could avoid court, could escape having her entire life examined and judged and criticized in front of strangers. "What do you think I should do?" Catherine's answer came without hesitation. "I think you should tell them to go to hell. You have the stronger case, and they know it. That's why they're offering to settle. They're scared they'll lose and walk away with nothing. But if we lose?" "We won't lose. Rachel, I've been doing this for 23 years. I know a strong case when I see one. Your family is desperate, and desperate people make settlement offers. Don't let them intimidate you into giving up what's rightfully yours." Rachel thought about Linda, sitting at that vanity for 60 years, never touching the treasure hidden inside because she believed it didn't belong to her. Linda had chosen principle over comfort, had lived with less rather than benefit from something that felt like betrayal. "Tell them no. We're going to court." Catherine's voice carried approval and something that might have been pride. "I was hoping you'd say that. See you Monday morning." The weekend passed in anxious preparation. Catherine spent Saturday going over testimony, preparing Rachel for the questions she'd face, the attacks that would come. They practiced responses until Rachel's answers sounded natural rather than rehearsed, confident rather than defensive. Sunday, Rachel took Sophie to the park, trying to create some normalcy before the Monday hearing. They fed ducks at the pond and played on swings that squeaked with rust and age. Sophie's laughter felt precious, a reminder of what actually mattered beneath all the legal maneuvering and family conflict. "Mom, are you scared about tomorrow?" Rachel considered lying, decided against it. "A little bit. But I'm also ready. Great Aunt Linda left that treasure for whoever needed it most. That's us, baby. And I'm going to fight to keep it because that's what she wanted." "Do you think she knew we'd find it?" "I think she hoped someone would find it eventually. Someone who would appreciate it and use it well." Rachel pulled Sophie close. "And I think she'd be happy it was us." Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray skies that matched the mood. Rachel, dressed in the most professional outfit she owned, a black dress and blazer purchased years ago for job interviews that hadn't led anywhere. Catherine had offered to buy her something new, but Rachel refused. She wanted to walk into that courtroom as herself, not as a manufactured version designed to impress judges. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing stone building that had witnessed decades of disputes and decisions. Rachel and Catherine arrived early, claiming a bench in the hallway outside the courtroom. Within 20 minutes, her family appeared. Patricia looked imperious in a cream-colored suit, her expression set in the disapproving lines Rachel had known her entire life. Marcus wore his real estate agent best, expensive and calculated to project success. Diane's outfit probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent had been. Designer labels and coordinated accessories. Ashley brought her husband, a silent presence meant to demonstrate family solidarity. They didn't speak to Rachel, didn't acknowledge her presence, except through careful avoidance, treating her like a stranger, or worse, like someone whose existence offended them. The message was clear. She'd chosen money over family, and there was no forgiveness for that. At 8:45, the courtroom doors opened. Judge Marion Foster presided, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She had a reputation as fair but no nonsense, someone who cut through emotional arguments to focus on legal merit. Richard Hendricks opened with aggressive confidence, painting Rachel as an opportunist who deliberately concealed estate assets. Your Honor, the facts are straightforward. Linda Mitchell died, leaving an estate that should have been divided equally among her surviving relatives. Rachel Morgan, through deliberate deception, removed property from that estate before anyone could properly evaluate its contents. He gestured dramatically. She fought her family for a piece of furniture everyone agreed was worthless, not out of sentiment as she claims, but because she knew or suspected what was hidden inside. When pressed, she refused reasonable requests to share her findings, choosing instead to hoard wealth that rightfully belongs to the entire family. Catherine stood with calm authority, her response measured and factual. Your Honor, Mr. Hendricks's characterization is fiction designed to obscure simple legal reality. Miss Morgan claimed one piece of furniture from her aunt's estate. Her family not only didn't contest that claim, they actively encouraged her to take the vanity away. They transferred ownership voluntarily and completely. She produced the photographs Margaret had taken, showing the vanity in Linda's house, showing Marcus helping load it, showing the dismissive texts from Diane and Ashley. These documents demonstrate that Miss Morgan's family viewed the vanity as worthless and wanted it removed. You cannot give away property and then demand it back when you discover you were wrong about its value. Judge Foster examined the evidence carefully, her expression revealing nothing. Miss Morgan, you'll testify first. Rachel took the stand with legs that felt unsteady but held. She swore to tell the truth, sat in the chair that felt too large, and faced Catherine's questions with answers they'd practiced until they became natural. Yes, she'd fought for the vanity. Yes, her family had called it worthless. No, she'd had no idea about the hidden compartment. Yes, she'd loved her Aunt Linda. No, she wasn't trying to steal from anyone. Then Richard Hendricks began his cross-examination, and Rachel understood what Catherine had warned her about. He was vicious, methodical, designed to make her look desperate and dishonest. Miss Morgan, you were facing eviction when you attended the family gathering, correct? Yes. You needed money desperately. I was struggling financially, yes. And yet, you fought for a piece of furniture you claim you didn't know was valuable. Doesn't that seem convenient? I fought for it because it was important to my aunt, because I had memories associated with it, not because I thought it was worth money. Convenient. Hendricks smiled without warmth. You also didn't tell your family immediately when the hidden compartment was discovered, did you? I told them within days, but not immediately. You could have called them the moment Miss Chen found the compartment. Instead, you waited until the items were authenticated and valued. Why? Rachel felt her temper rising and forced it down. Because I wanted to understand what we'd found before dealing with my family's response. Or because you were planning how to keep it all for yourself. Catherine objected, argumentative and assuming facts not in evidence. Judge Foster sustained the objection, but Hendricks had made his point. He continued in this vein for 40 minutes, each question designed to paint Rachel as calculating and greedy, someone who'd manipulated circumstances for personal gain. When he finally finished, Rachel felt exhausted and angry and very close to tears she refused to shed in front of her family. Margaret Chen testified next, describing the discovery process with professional precision. She explained her expertise, her initial assessment of the vanity, the suspicious weight of the mirror frame, the hidden mechanism that opened the compartment. She confirmed that Rachel had been present but hadn't opened the compartment herself, that everything had been documented as it was discovered. Under cross-examination, Hendricks tried to suggest that Margaret and Rachel had conspired together, that the whole discovery had been staged. Margaret's response was withering in its professional disdain. Mr. Hendricks, I've been in this business for 30 years. My reputation depends on honesty and accurate assessment. Suggesting I would participate in fraud is not only insulting, it's absurd. I documented everything precisely because I knew this discovery was significant and would likely face scrutiny. David Chen testified about the diamonds, their quality and age, their value established through objective gemological standards. James Rodriguez explained the bonds and stock certificates, their historical context and accumulated worth. Both witnesses established that the items had been hidden for decades, that their discovery was genuine rather than fabricated. Then Patricia took the stand, and the courtroom temperature seemed to drop. She was calm, controlled, absolutely certain of her rightness. Under Richard Hendricks's gentle questioning, she portrayed herself as a concerned mother trying to ensure fair treatment for all her children. Linda was my aunt, my father's sister. I loved her dearly. When she died, we divided her estate as fairly as we could. If we'd known about the hidden treasure, of course, we would have included it in that division. It was never about the vanity itself. It was about what was inside. And your daughter Rachel's behavior? Patricia's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Rachel has struggled for years. Financial problems, poor decisions, a pattern of needing help from family. When she fought for the vanity, we thought it was another impulsive emotional choice. We tried to guide her toward practicality, but she wouldn't listen. The characterization was expertly done, painting Rachel as incompetent while maintaining a veneer of maternal concern. Catherine's cross-examination cut through it with surgical precision. Mrs. Morgan, you referred to your daughter's financial struggles. Can you tell the court about the insurance money from your husband's death? Patricia's composure flickered. I'm not sure what you mean. The $17,000 in life insurance that was divided among you and your 4 children. Rachel received her share, approximately $3,400. What happened to that money? I don't recall the specific details. Let me refresh your memory. Catherine produced bank records Rachel had provided, showing the transfer of $3,400 into Rachel's account, followed by 4 separate transfers out totaling the same amount. These transfers went to your other children, at your request, for what you described as emergency family expenses. Is that correct? Patricia's face had gone tight. There were legitimate family needs. and Rachel was promised repayment, correct? In fact, she has texts from her siblings promising to pay her back. Has she received any of that money? Family finances are complicated. Yes or no, Mrs. Morgan? Has Rachel been repaid? No. So, when you describe Rachel's financial struggles, isn't it accurate to say that her family took her inheritance and never returned it, leaving her without the safety net she might otherwise have had? Patricia's composure was fully cracked now, her voice sharp. We didn't take anything. Those were loans. Loans that were never repaid, leaving your daughter homeless and desperate while you lived comfortably. Catherine's voice carried steel beneath the professional tone. And now, when she's found something valuable on her own, you want to take that too. Hendricks objected. Judge Foster sustained it. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted from Rachel the opportunist to Rachel the victim of family exploitation. Marcus testified next, trying to re-establish that the Vanity had been part of the general estate and should have been evaluated before removal. Catherine demolished his credibility with his own texts, reading aloud the message where he'd called the Vanity worthless junk and told Rachel she was making stupid emotional decisions. Mr. Morgan, these are your words, correct? I was frustrated. You were clear. You thought the Vanity was worthless. You actively encouraged Rachel to take it away. You even helped her move it, didn't you? Yes, but... So you voluntarily transferred what you believed was worthless furniture to your sister, and now that it turns out to have value, you want it back. Is that accurate? Marcus's face flushed dark red. That's not fair. None of us knew. Exactly. None of you knew. But the law is clear. When you transfer property, you transfer it completely, including any surprises it might contain. You made a choice, Mr. Morgan. You don't get to unmake it just because you were wrong. Diane's testimony was similarly dismantled. Her dismissive texts and emails introduced as evidence that she'd viewed the Vanity as trash worth donating rather than preserving. Ashley barely managed to maintain that she'd cared about the furniture at all. Her social media posts about old lady junk, undermining any claim of sentimental attachment. By midday, the case that had seemed formidable that morning had fractured into obvious desperation. Judge Foster called a recess for lunch, instructing everyone to return at 2 p.m. for closing arguments. Rachel and Catherine ate sandwiches from a deli across the street, neither of them tasting the food. How do you think it's going? Rachel asked. I think we're winning. Your family's case has collapsed under scrutiny. But judges can be unpredictable, and this involves family law, which brings emotional considerations into play. Catherine set down her sandwich. But Rachel, even if we win today, this isn't over. Your family will remember this. The relationship damage is permanent. There was no relationship to damage. Rachel's voice was flat. They've been judging me and dismissing me for years. This is just the first time I've had something worth fighting for, and they can't stand that I won't roll over. At 2 p.m., they returned to the courtroom for closing arguments. Richard Hendricks made his final pitch, emphasizing family unity and fair distribution, painting Rachel as selfish and divisive. Catherine responded with cold legal logic, establishing clear property law, demonstrating voluntary transfer, introducing Linda's letter as definitive evidence of testamentary intent. Judge Foster listened to both sides, took notes, asked clarifying questions that suggested she'd already reached her decision, but wanted specific points addressed. Finally, at 3:30 p.m., she announced she'd heard enough. This court will issue a ruling. However, given the clear legal principles involved, I'm prepared to rule from the bench rather than taking the matter under advisement. The courtroom went silent. Rachel felt Catherine's hand squeeze hers under the table, offering support, and solidarity. Judge Foster removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Patricia and her children. "I've practiced law for 35 years. I've seen many family disputes over money and property. This case is not complex legally, though it's clearly painful personally." She turned to her notes. "The law regarding property transfer is unambiguous. When property is given to someone, whether through gift, sale, or voluntary surrender, that transfer includes everything associated with that property, known and unknown. The family's argument that they didn't know about the hidden compartment is legally irrelevant." Patricia's face had gone pale. Marcus sat rigid. Diane stared at the judge with an expression of growing horror. "Furthermore," Judge Foster continued, "the evidence demonstrates that the petitioners actively dismissed the Vanity as worthless and encouraged Rachel Morgan to remove it from the estate. Text messages, witness testimony, and their own statements confirm this. You cannot voluntarily give away property and then demand its return when you discover you were mistaken about its value." She held up Linda's letter. "Most compelling is this document, written by Linda Mitchell 60 years ago, explicitly stating that whoever discovers the hidden treasure is meant to have it. This represents clear testamentary intent, even if not formally included in her will. Miss Mitchell could have accessed this treasure at any time during her life. She chose not to. She chose to leave it for someone who needed it." Judge Foster looked directly at Rachel. "Miss Morgan fought for a piece of furniture her family dismissed. She preserved something they wanted to throw away. She discovered what was hidden through legitimate means, documented appropriately. Under law and equity, the contents of that vanity belonged to her." The gavel came down with finality. Petition denied. Rachel Morgan is recognized as the rightful owner of all items discovered in Linda Mitchell's vanity. Petitioners are responsible for court costs and opposing counsel fees. This case is closed. The courtroom erupted in reactions. Patricia stood abruptly, her face twisted with fury. Marcus was already storming toward the door. Diane sat frozen, staring at the judge as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. Ashley burst into tears, though whether from anger or disappointment, Rachel couldn't tell. Catherine grabbed Rachel's arm, her grip tight with triumph and relief. "We won. It's over. It's yours." Rachel felt tears streaming down her face, a release of tension that had been building for weeks. She'd won. The judge had seen through her family's arguments and manipulations. Linda's gift was hers to keep. Outside the courtroom, her family waited like an ambush. Patricia's voice was cold with rage. "You've destroyed this family over greed. I hope you're satisfied." "I'm satisfied that a judge saw the truth." Rachel's voice was steady, stronger than she'd expected. "You dismissed me my entire life. You took from me when I had nothing and never paid me back. You called me stupid for caring about something you didn't understand. And now you're angry that you were wrong. You could have shared." Diane's voice was thick with tears, or fury, or both. "Family should share." "You're right. Family should share. Where was that principle when I was living in my car, when I was facing eviction, when I needed help and you all turned away?" Rachel felt the anger she'd been suppressing for years finally breaking free. "You only care about sharing when it benefits you." Marcus stepped forward, his face dark with rage. "Don't come crawling back when you blow through all that money. Don't expect any of us to help you when you make your next stupid decision." "I won't." Rachel's voice rang with certainty. "I won't come back because there's nothing here worth coming back to. You taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when things are hard. And none of you ever showed up." She turned and walked away with Catherine beside her, leaving her family standing on the courthouse steps, defeated and furious, and finally seeing her as someone who wouldn't be dismissed anymore. In Catherine's car, the tears came harder, a combination of relief and grief and victory. "I can't believe we won." "You won because you were right. Legally and morally." Catherine started the engine. "Your family will never forgive you for this. You understand that?" "There's nothing to forgive. I didn't do anything wrong." Rachel wiped her eyes. They just can't stand that someone they looked down on ended up with something valuable. The days following the court victory passed in a blur of financial arrangements and emotional processing. The diamonds were sold at auction for $662,000. The bonds were redeemed for $91,000 after accumulated interest was calculated. The stock certificates were converted through a specialized broker for $187,000. The jewelry brought another $43,000 at estate sale. The Vanity itself sold to a furniture museum for $56,000, where it would be preserved and displayed as an example of Samuel Harrison's craftsmanship. Total proceeds: $1,039,000. After Catherine's fees, taxes, and various expenses, Rachel was left with $714,000, more money than she'd ever imagined having. Generational wealth, as Margaret had said. The kind of money that changed everything. She bought a house, not a mansion, just a modest 3-bedroom in a good school district, with a yard for the dog Sophie had been promised, and a room that could be Sophie's art studio. The house cost $285,000, leaving substantial savings for investment and emergency funds. She quit both her jobs, not with drama or speeches, just quiet notices and thank yous to managers who'd employed her during desperate times. The freedom from constant work was disorienting at first. The absence of panic about making rent, feeling like she'd forgotten something important. Sophie got her dog, a rescue mutt named Bailey, who slept at the foot of her bed and followed her everywhere. The child blossomed with the stability, no longer anxious about money or moving or her mother's stress. She took art classes and swimming lessons and developed the easy confidence of kids who don't have to worry about whether their shoes fit. Rachel set up a college fund that would cover not just undergraduate but graduate school if Sophie wanted it. She established a trust that would provide financial security into Sophie's adulthood. She invested carefully, following advice from the financial planner Catherine had recommended, building wealth that would compound over decades. But the most important thing she did was create the Linda Mitchell Foundation for single mothers in crisis. She funded it with $100,000 initially, enough to provide emergency assistance to women facing eviction, homelessness, medical bills, the kind of desperate circumstances Rachel knew too intimately. The foundation helped women like she'd been, offering not just money but connection to resources, legal aid, job training, childcare assistance. Every woman who received help was told about Linda, about a woman who'd lived simply so she could leave a gift for someone who needed it most. Rachel volunteered at the foundation office twice a week, meeting women whose stories mirrored her own, offering hope that circumstances could change, that fighting for what mattered could lead to transformation. 6 months after the court victory, Rachel received a letter, no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. She opened it with trembling hands. "Rachel, I won't pretend I've forgiven you. I haven't. What you did was selfish, and it destroyed any pretense of family unity we might have maintained. But I'm writing because I found something while cleaning out more of Mom's things. Letters between Linda and our grandmother, from the 1960 seconds. I wasn't going to send them to you, but then I read them, and I realized you should have them." Linda wrote about Thomas, about the treasure she'd hidden, about her decision to keep it sealed away. She also wrote about her nieces and nephews, about watching us grow up, about you specifically. She said you reminded her of herself, stubborn, idealistic, willing to fight for things that seemed impractical. She said you had Thomas's kindness and her own determination. She said if anyone in the family deserved to find what she'd hidden, it was you. I still think you should have shared. I still think you were wrong. But Linda apparently disagreed, and since it was her treasure to give, I suppose her opinion matters more than mine. I don't expect we'll reconcile. The damage is too deep. But I wanted you to know that Linda chose you deliberately, not by accident. Maybe that matters to you. Maybe it doesn't. Diane. The letters were enclosed, yellowed pages covered in Linda's careful handwriting. Rachel read them with tears streaming down her face, learning about the woman who'd saved her from a distance, who'd watched her grow up and decided she was worthy of a gift that had waited decades to be given. In one letter, from 1987, Linda wrote, "Rachel has her father's gentle heart and her own fierce determination. She'll face hardships, I think. The world isn't kind to women who lead with kindness rather than calculation. But she'll endure. And perhaps someday, if the universe is just, she'll find what I've hidden and understand that love given freely is never wasted, even when it seems to be." Rachel framed that letter and hung it in her home office, a reminder of the aunt who'd seen her clearly and loved her anyway. A year after the court victory, on the anniversary of Linda's death, Rachel organized a small memorial service at Linda's grave. Just her and Sophie and Margaret Chen, who'd become a friend through the shared experience of discovering treasure. Sophie placed flowers on the grave, white roses that Linda had apparently loved. Rachel read aloud from Linda's letter about Thomas and love and the treasure that waited for someone who needed it. "Thank you," Rachel said to the gravestone, "to the woman who couldn't hear but somehow felt present anyway. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing I was worthy. Thank you for giving me the chance to build the life I never thought I'd have." The wind moved through the cemetery trees, carrying autumn leaves in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Sophie took her mother's hand, and they stood together in comfortable silence, honoring a woman who'd transformed loss into hope and hidden that hope where it could be found by someone desperate enough to look. That evening, Rachel sat at the desk in her home office, the desk that stood in a house she owned, writing thank you notes to the foundation donors who'd contributed to help other women in crisis. Bailey snored at her feet. Sophie did homework at the kitchen table, complaining good-naturedly about multiplication tables. Normal, boring, precious domestic life that Rachel had fought for and won. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Found another interesting piece at an estate sale. Want to come look? Might be nothing. Might be everything." Rachel smiled and typed back, "I've learned that things people dismiss as nothing sometimes turn out to be everything. I'll be there. Tomorrow." She set down the phone and looked around the office, at the framed letter from Linda, at the photographs of Sophie laughing with Bailey, at the financial statements showing investments growing steadily, building security for a future that once seemed impossible. 1 year ago, she'd been facing eviction, living in an apartment she couldn't afford, working 2 jobs that barely covered survival. Her family had dismissed her as incompetent and foolish. She'd fought for a piece of furniture everyone said was worthless, and that fight had changed everything. Linda had hidden her treasure in plain sight for 60 years, waiting for someone who would see value where others saw only old furniture and inconvenience. She'd transformed her grief into a gift, her loss into legacy, her heartbreak into hope for a stranger she'd never meet. And Rachel had received that gift with the same fierce determination Linda had used to create it. She'd fought her family, endured their judgment, stood firm when everyone said she was wrong. She'd proven that sometimes the things everyone dismisses as worthless turn out to be priceless. She'd learned that love given freely is never wasted, even when it takes decades to find its recipient. That, standing up for what matters, is worth the cost, even when the cost seems unbearable. That treasure comes in unexpected forms, hidden where only those willing to fight will find it. Linda's vanity had saved Rachel's life. But more than that, it had taught her that she was worth saving, that her instincts mattered, that refusing to be dismissed by people who didn't see her value was the first step toward discovering her own worth. The legacy wasn't the money, though the money mattered. The legacy was the lesson. Some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone says you're wrong. Especially when everyone says you're wrong. Rachel turned off the office light and went to help Sophie with her homework, grateful beyond words for an aunt she'd barely known, and a gift that had transformed both their lives. Sometimes the trash everyone wants you to throw away turns out to be the treasure you were always meant to find. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.